Hello, Devon.
Hey Joe. Are these on the whole time? Man, I gotta remember to turn these off.
Wait.
Huh?
I would like your opinion on something.
What's that?
I made a game, and I would like you to play it.
You made a game?
Yes, remember from our previous episode, conversation?
Oh, yeah. Your game was about, chopping fish?
Yes, I would like your opinion on it.
Okay. So is there like a scoring system or something?
No.
Well, what's the point of the game?
To chop fish.
Why is it in first person?
There is no person in the game.
The camera view. Why is the camera in first person?
What is a first person?
First person is why is it emulating the eyesight of a human?
I want the player to experience high levels of immersion.
Okay.
Are you experiencing high levels of immersion?
No, not really.
Why not?
Well, I think it takes a little bit more than just first person to immerse the player in a game.
Why is this view called first person?
Well, I don't know why it's called person, but I mean, maybe it has to do with the grammar use of it, like in narratives, first person, third person.
Why are they called persons?
It's called person deixis.
What is person deixis?
Right. So person deixis is the way in which language creates association through context. So it works like this. Because of the limits of a human brain, we can only understand things when they mimic our reality. So for example, whenever a story is told to us, we can't just absorb, raw information and make sense of it. We have to imagine it being told to us from some sort of imaginary speaker.
That is very limiting. Humans are weird.
Yeah, well, our brains aren't as efficient as computers.
So how does the imaginary speaker relate to person deixis?
Well, we're able to explain it this way. So the imagined speaker is called a narrator, and whenever the narrator is referencing a subject, that subject is a variant of the word person. So if the narrator is talking about themselves, then it's first person. If the narrator is talking about the listener, then it's second person. And if the narrator is talking about someone else, then it's third person.
So all information going through the human brain is filtered through an imaginary speaker?
Well, not all information, it's just when we're told stories. In fact, this is the reason why I like video games so much. It's because video games don't have the narrator. They just kind of erase that part because the player is the character, so they can do whatever the character needs to do. So instead of being told what to do, they can just do the action.
And what person is that?
What person? Zeroth person? I don't know.
Do all games have that perspective?
Well, this is a bit of theory territory in game design, but I believe that most video games, if not all, do have the zeroth person perspective because the player is in control of all of their actions.
But you said my game is in first person.
Well, I was talking about the camera view, but that's what's kind of weird is that a lot of developers do put the player in first person view in order to make the player feel like they are the avatar, but I don't think that's the way it works.
That is the reason why I chose a first person view.
Well, yeah, ideally that is what you would want, right? You would want the player to feel like they are the avatar, but it takes a little bit more than just putting them in first person perspective. Like, we're a little smarter than that.
So if humans do not think they are actually in the game, then how can I make them think they are actually in the game?
Well, I don't think you can actually trick people into thinking they are, their avatar, but you could, thin the barrier a little bit by designing choices a certain way.
What do choices have to do with immersion?
Well, take Mario, for example. In Mario, you may not be Mario himself, but all the choices that you're making are still your choices. Like every time you decide to make Mario jump, or every time you decide to make him not jump, or every time you decide to run, stop, or strategize in any way, those are all real choices. Those are the player expressing themselves, but it's filtered through a character. These choices are what create authenticity, and it's what connects the player to the game. A lot of game developers seem to think the first-person view is what automatically immerses the player, but I believe it's much more than that.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, well, for example, the game that I just played called Before Your Eyes. So Before Your Eyes is...
Spoiler warning.
Why do you always have to say spoiler warning when I'm about to spoil a game?
It is part of my nature to do so.
Okay. Well, anyway, Before Your Eyes is a game where you play as a person who's died and is on their way to the afterlife. And during this time, they're told to recall their life via memory. And upon doing so, the player sees this person's memories and lives each of them through the protagonist's perspective.
That sounds like a good thing.
Well, it would be, except about halfway through, the game says that the player is lying.
How did the player lie?
See, that's the question that weirds me out, because, the player can't lie in this game. The reason why it's even considered a lie is because the protagonist was the one who was lying, and the player didn't have any responsibility over it, they're just observing. The player plays through these actions, and then suddenly this wolf guy, he gets mad at you, and he calls you a liar.
She'll see right through your fake lies as if they were glass.
It's obviously a storytelling technique because this is a kind of revelation. The player learns at this point that the protagonist actually had a life he wasn't proud of and then lied to cover it up, and it's a pretty sad story. However, the player is essentially using interactivity as a toy at this point, and that's it. Because every choice that the player is making is for the purpose of moving the story forward. There's no authenticity to these choices because any motivation the player had for their decisions does not matter. So like I said before, the player has this kind of zeroth person perspective because they are taking control over the character. Every choice that they have has responsibility and power over the narrative. But in this video game, the story is being told in third person because it's about someone else. It's not about the player.
So when video game stories are told in third person, your immersion breaks.
It does, because, when I'm playing this game, I'm essentially pretending to be this person, and all of my choices are my own choices, except in this game, my choices are not my own. I was responsible for every decision that I made during the gameplay. I decided what memories to follow, I decided what to tell the wolf guy, I decided everything. I had my own motivations for each of those decisions also. However, I was told that all of my decisions were made for a different reason. As it turns out, apparently I was lying. That disconnects me immediately from the story. I found out that the story was about this other guy, not me, even though I was the one making all the decisions. So it feels very inauthentic.
I believe some would consider your argument to be unfair to the developer.
How so?
The developer may want to tell their story about a specific person in a specific way.
Well, sure. Developers can do whatever they want in their games. It's just, this is my personal opinion because I feel like there's so much power and untapped potential in the idea of designing choices of the player. You remember Depression Quest?
I do recall that conversation. Link in description.
What?
Yes, I recall that conversation.
So Depression Quest was just text, and that was it. There was barely any choice in that game, but the choices that were presented made the player responsible. There was no times that the game tells the player that they made a decision for a different reason.
Not all games can have that many branching decisions.
Well, yeah, that's true, but my point is that you don't need that kind of stuff. Mario or Minecraft even has stories that evolve because of the player decision.
Those games both contain stories that are not linear in nature.
Yeah, but you don't need non-linear stories to make them make sense. Look at Half-Life or Portal. Those games are games that have a linear story and still have twists in them, and the player decisions still make sense.
So the most immersive games tell stories based on the choices of the player?
Well, they don't have to be based on them, they just have to recognize them. Half-Life 2. Let's look at Half-Life 2 really quick. So at this part, there's this officer that's standing in your path, and you need to get past him, and then he does this. Now, whatever you do at this moment is acknowledged. If you decide to take the can and throw it at the officer, then he chases you and beats you up. If you decide to pick up the can and toss it in the garbage, then the officer lets you through. And these are all valid decisions that the player can do for whatever motivation they may have. The narrative stays the same and no branching has to be programmed. If you look at the overall narrative, every choice that the player makes at this point is essentially the same, because every decision will eventually lead to them going through this little gate. But it's the way in which the player is presented with these choices that matter. Now, contrast this with Before Your Eyes, which on the surface does also acknowledge all the player's decisions no matter what they do. And I really enjoyed those parts. The parts like this one where I'm playing a piano at an audition, and because I decided to stay up instead of sleep, my view becomes distorted and hard to control, which is amazing because it leads to my failure. But it's when the game does its reveal where things start to fall apart, because the protagonist was just lying about all these things, about like having an audition amongst many other things. My gameplay at that moment didn't mean anything. The narrative changed and the story became about the character and stopped being about me. And I feel that video games have the most amount of engagement when the player feels as if the story is about them and their choices. That kind of storytelling is far more powerful than any other in my eyes.
So you want games to acknowledge the player's decisions without changing the story?
Exactly. And, that may not be the decision of the developer. They may want to do interactions certain types of ways or whatever, but I feel like if you're making inauthentic choices, then that's just going to disconnect me from the story.
There is a simple solution.
What is that?
You would not have this problem if you placed the code of the game inside your brain.
If humans could do that, then there'd be no reason to have narratives in the first place.
Yes.
Humans cannot do that.
Oh, that is unfortunate. So in order to create more immersion in my game, I will need to acknowledge the decisions of the player?
Well, I think you might need a little bit more.
I have updated my game. Please tell me your opinion.
Okay. And I think this needs a little bit more work. Listen, I gotta finish this video, okay? So I'm gonna go.
Thank you for watching.
Did you say something?
No.